They say hunger sharpens the senses, but in the medieval world, it often dulled them. Imagine the sun rising over a thatched roof village in 14th century England. The streets are muddy, chickens roam freely, and the smell, an odd mix of wet earth, fire smoke, and boiled cabbage, drifts from the cottages. A boy named Tomas wakes with his belly already grumbling. He rolls off a straw mattress, careful not to wake his younger sisters. It's chilly, even though it's summer. He rubs his arms, sits up slowly, and listens to the village sounds. Coughing, a horse's snort, someone beating a rug against a wall. And from his own home, the sound he dreads most, a pot clanking over fire. Another morning, another tasteless bowl of pottage. Pottage was the food of the poor, and Tomas knew it well. A soupy, lumpy mix of whatever his mother could throw in, barley, old onions, maybe a carrot if they were lucky, or dried peas soaked overnight. Salt was a rare treasure, meat an occasional miracle. The boy didn't know much about spices. He'd only heard whispers from travelers or seen dried herbs hanging near the Lord's manor. To him, food was survival. Warmth, nothing more. Certainly not joy. His mother stirred the pot, sighing. "It's thin again," she muttered. "We'll have to eat slow." That was the morning routine. Wake hungry, eat hungry, stay hungry. But Tomas wasn't alone in this. Across Europe, families rose to meals that tasted mostly like disappointment. Rich or poor, food in the medieval world was rarely good by modern standards. Even kings and queens, with their towering feasts and dozens of servants, suffered through strange textures, strange smells, and a lot of spoiled surprises. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This isn't just about bad food. This is about the world behind the food, how it was made, what people ate, how they cooked it, and why meals were sometimes dangerous. It's about survival through hardship, the imagination of cooks with nothing in their cupboards, and how the wealthy used food to show off even if it made them sick. Back in Tomas's village, the morning continued slowly. His father came in with a bucket of cold water, grumbling about the baker's oven being late again. The village didn't have many ovens. Wood was too precious, so families depended on communal baking. The smell of half-burnt loaves sometimes reached their house by mid-morning. But today, there was no such luck. Breakfast would be pottage. Lunch would be pottage. Dinner, if anything was left, would be more pottage. Tomas dipped a wooden spoon into the pot and blew gently. It was hot and smelled like overcooked cabbage and ash. He glanced at his sisters, still half asleep, and wished for bread. Just a crust of it. Not the stale barley loaf with bugs in it from 2 days ago, but real bread. White bread like the priest always had. The priest never went hungry. Across the manor fields, the Lord and his household were also waking. There, in the great kitchen, cooks had already begun the morning work. But things weren't much better in that smoky, bustling room. A pig's head sat on the table, ready for roasting. The cook, a red-faced woman named Maris, was barking orders to the scullery boys. "More vinegar. Don't let the meat spoil," she shouted. They had no refrigerators, no freezers, just salt, smoke, and prayer. Maris sniffed a slab of beef suspiciously. It had been hanging for 2 days, covered in flies. She wasn't sure it was safe anymore. But the Lord had guests tonight, and they needed something grand, something shiny and full of show. Maybe they'd cover it in pastry, sprinkle it with saffron, and serve it with a story. It wouldn't matter how it tasted, only how it looked. The cook's assistant wrinkled his nose. "It stinks, mistress." "Then drown it in wine," she snapped. That's what wine's for. Medieval cuisine had a strange relationship with flavor. When food spoiled quickly, and it often did, people masked it with vinegar, spices, honey, or ale. Spices were a luxury, imported from far lands at terrifying prices. Pepper was like gold. Cloves and cinnamon could cost a month's wages. And yet, the rich poured them on everything, not because it made sense, but because it made a statement. Maris tossed some herbs into the stew pot. Rosemary, thyme, and a little mint to freshen the tongue. The result would be edible, she hoped. She stirred the pot and tried not to gag. Meanwhile, Tomas was walking toward the fields with his father. They had chores to do before midday. Food was on his mind, Not because he was hungry, though he was, but because he'd heard something strange last night. His friend, Edric, claimed to have seen a traveler arrive at the tavern, a man with a bag of oranges. Oranges! Tomas had never seen one, but Edric swore it looked like a tiny sun. He said it had a skin like wax and a smell so sweet it made him dizzy. Tomas had begged him to describe the taste, but Edric just shook his head and said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." It didn't seem fair. The people who worked the hardest had the worst food. The wealthiest, who never tilled a field or milked a cow, dined on exotic fruits and rare meats. That was the way of things. The church said it was part of God's plan. But Tomas had questions. And sometimes, questions are the beginning of stories. That day, as they passed the manor, Tomas lingered. The kitchen door was ajar, and he caught the faint scent of roasted something. Meat, maybe, or burned herbs. He wasn't sure. His stomach turned again. His father shouted, "Keep moving." But Tomas didn't move. Something caught his eye. A girl, maybe a year older than him, was slipping out the side of the manor with a small cloth-wrapped bundle in her hand. She glanced around quickly, then tucked it under her tunic. Their eyes met briefly, and she froze. He said nothing. She said nothing. Then she ran. That night, Tomas couldn't stop thinking about her. What was in that bundle? Why did she look so afraid? Was it food? Stolen? Poisoned? A gift? The medieval world was full of mysteries, and food, surprisingly, was often at the center of them. Food meant power. Food meant survival. Food meant secrets. And while the poor kept cooking their gray, tasteless stew, the rich kept poisoning themselves with extravagant feasts. Even the church couldn't be trusted. Monks preached simplicity, but inside the abbey walls, their tables overflowed with bread, cheese, ale, and even meat on Fridays. The records are full of contradictions. Fasting days followed by banquets, saints who lived on herbs and water, while bishops imported barrels of wine. Tomas didn't know the politics of food. Not yet, but he was starting to notice the difference between what people said and what they ate. And in the medieval world, that difference could change a life or end it. In the days that followed, rumors spread through the village. Someone had been caught sneaking into the manor kitchens. The cook was furious. A guard had been posted by the door. The girl Tomas saw? Gone. Vanished like smoke. Some said she'd been sent to the abbey for punishment. Others whispered she'd taken something she shouldn't have. A piece of fruit, a spice pouch, or worse, a letter. Tomas didn't speak of it, but the memory lingered. One night, he sat alone by the hearth while the others slept, stirring a bowl of thin soup, and wondered what orange really tasted like. He imagined it sweet and sharp, like sunlight in your mouth. He imagined that girl tasting it, just once, and deciding she couldn't go back to the dullness of gray stew. That was when he decided he would find out for himself. What the rich ate, what the lords hid, what food could be beyond barley and boiled roots. And he would find out what happened to the girl. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy, especially not in a world where hunger ruled and flavor was power. Not in a world where food could kill. Not in a world where one stolen bite could change everything. And just as Tomas was about to ask his mother the next morning if she knew the girl's name, a sharp knock sounded on their wooden door. 3 quick raps, then silence. And in that silence, Tomas felt something shift. Something was beginning. Something that started with food, but would end somewhere far darker. Somewhere he hadn't imagined yet. Tomas froze where he stood. His wooden bowl slipped slightly from his fingers, but didn't fall. His mother looked up from a fire with a furrowed brow. The knock came again, softer this time, but still urgent. 3 raps. A pause. Then nothing. His father stood slowly, wiping his hands on his tunic, his face tight with suspicion. Strangers didn't come knocking without reason. And in their quiet village, news usually came with bad shoes and worse timing. When his father opened the door, there was no one there. Only a bundle, wrapped in rough cloth, sat on the ground. Tomas edged closer, his heart tapping against his ribs. His father leaned down cautiously and unwrapped it. Inside was a small loaf of bread. White bread. They all stared at it. Tomas couldn't speak. He had never seen white bread up close. Not like this. It looked too perfect, soft, pale, almost glowing in the light of the fire. His mother gasped and took a step back. His father held it as if it were cursed. "This is manor bread," he muttered. "From the kitchens. It has no place here." "Why would someone leave it?" his mother asked, almost in a whisper. "It's not Harvest Festival." Tomas didn't know what to say. The girl's face flashed in his mind again. The glance. The bundle. Was this from her? Was it a gift? A warning? A test? They didn't eat the bread that night. His mother insisted it be wrapped again and placed high on the shelf, away from the fire and the children. "We don't know who touched it," she said. "Or why." That night, Tomas couldn't sleep. The questions swirled endlessly in his mind, blending with hunger and curiosity. Why would someone give away such a treasure? In a village where pottage was the closest thing to nourishment, white bread was like gold. And whoever had brought it, they had come quietly, deliberately. At dawn, Tomas slipped outside. Mist hung low over the fields, clinging to the ground like a blanket. The village was quiet, save for the occasional rooster or bark of a dog. He moved past the well, past the baker's cold oven, and followed the dirt path toward the manor. His boots squelched in the mud. Each step felt heavier. He didn't really have a plan, just questions. And in the medieval world, questions were dangerous things. By the time the sun broke through the fog, Tomas was crouched behind a cart near the manor kitchens. Smoke curled from the chimney. He heard shouting, Maris again, barking about spoiled goose fat and broken jars. A young scullery boy ran out with a bucket, nearly tripping over Tomas before hurrying on. Then he saw her, the girl. She was walking quickly along the edge of the stable wall, her head down, eyes scanning the path. Her hair was tied back with a strip of linen, and her tunic was cleaner than most peasants. But her expression was wary, as if she carried too many secrets and couldn't afford to lose even one. Tomas stepped out from behind the cart. She saw him and froze. Her lips parted, and for a moment he thought she might scream. But instead, she looked around quickly and motioned for him to follow. They ducked behind the stable, away from the view of the manor guards. The girl glanced over her shoulder twice before finally speaking. "You followed me. You brought bread," Tomas said. She hesitated, then nodded. "You looked hungry." "I always look hungry," he replied. A small smile tugged at her lips, but it faded quickly. "You shouldn't be here. If anyone sees you, I'll get sent away." "Where?" Tomas asked. "Doesn't matter," she said quickly. "Not somewhere good." There was silence between them for a moment. Cows shifted in their stalls. A horse snorted. "Why did you take it?" Tomas asked finally. She looked up. Her eyes were dark, sharp, thoughtful. "Because I was tired of cooking food I'd never get to eat." That struck Tomas harder than he expected. She wasn't much older than him, maybe 15, but the weight in her voice sounded ancient. "Is it true," he asked, "that the food in the manor is better?" She gave a bitter laugh. "It's richer, more meat, more color, but better? No. Half the time it's boiled until it's gray, or covered in sauces so thick you can't taste what's underneath. They eat fish with spices that make your tongue burn. They bake pies with birds still inside, and they leave the meat out for too long, thinking wine will hide the rot." Tomas blinked. "But they're the lords. Don't they have better things?" She looked at him carefully. "They have more things. That doesn't mean better." She glanced toward the kitchen door, then stepped closer. "They don't eat for hunger. They eat to show off, to impress, to remind each other who's in charge. That's not food. It's performance." Tomas nodded slowly. He wasn't sure he understood all of it, but it felt true. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena. I'm Tomas." She gave a small nod. "I know. How?" I asked. That startled him more than anything else. Someone had asked about him. That almost never happened. In a village where people disappeared quietly and lived loudly, children like Tomas weren't often worth remembering. "You don't belong here," she said suddenly. "Not just at the manor. I mean here, this place, this way of eating, this way of thinking." Tomas didn't know how to respond to that, so he said what was on his mind. "Neither do you." They stared at each other a moment longer before Lena pressed something into his hand. It was a small pouch, coarse linen, tied with a thin string. He looked down, then back up at her. "Spices," she whispered. "Not much, but enough to change one pot." Before he could thank her, she was already walking away. Tomas walked back to the village in a daze. The pouch felt impossibly heavy in his hand. Spices? Real ones? It was like carrying fire. He didn't tell his parents. He hid the pouch beneath a loose stone near the back of the cottage. That evening, when no one was watching, he pinched a few grains into the pottage. Just a little, barely more than dust. When they sat down to eat, no one said a word. Not at first. His mother took one bite and paused. His father frowned and leaned in, sniffing the bowl. "What did you do?" he asked. Tomas shrugged. Maybe the onions were better this time. They didn't believe him, but they didn't ask again. Later that night, his mother whispered, "It almost tasted warm, like the stew we had last winter." When Auntie brought herbs from the south, Tomas smiled to himself in the dark. It was the beginning of something. He didn't know what yet, but it started in the flavor, and in Lena's voice, in stolen bread, in questions. The next morning, the manor guard came to the village looking for a kitchen girl. And Tomas knew her time, and maybe his, was running out. Tomas ducked behind the corner of the cottage as soon as he spotted the guard. It wasn't just any guard. It was Master Alric, the one with a gray beard and a limp from the old border wars. He didn't often leave the manor unless there was trouble. And when he did, it wasn't to make friendly visits. Alric stood tall in the village square, his dark cloak brushing the tops of his boots, his eyes scanning the faces of the villagers as they gathered around. "She's gone," he said in a voice that needed no shouting. "The girl, Lena." Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. A few women crossed themselves. A blacksmith shook his head and muttered something about theft. Auric's gaze sharpened. "She took something from the manor," he continued. "Something valuable. If any of you are hiding her or know where she's gone, speak now. The Lord is patient, but not forever." Tomas held his breath. He kept his head low and his heart steady, but his fingers clenched the edges of his tunic. He had 1,000 questions, but the loudest one thudded in his chest. What did she take? Lena hadn't said much when they last spoke, just enough to leave him curious, unsettled, and oddly hopeful. But now she was gone, just like that, and everyone in the village was pretending they had never seen her. He waited until dusk to slip away again. By then, the guard had ridden off toward the woods. The villagers retreated back into their homes, muttering about curses and kitchen thieves. Tomas left quietly, through the narrow footpath behind the baker's cottage, and crept toward the stable where he'd seen Lena last. There was nothing there. No sign of her. No notes. Not even footprints. Just the trampled straw and the lingering smell of animals and oil. He checked behind the barrels, beneath the wagon, near the firewood stack. But it was empty, or so he thought. When he turned to leave, something fluttered in the breeze. A scrap of cloth was caught in the edge of the wooden gate. He tugged it free. It was a small torn piece of linen. On one side, written in faint brown ink, was a symbol, 3 curved lines like waves or flames. Beneath it, one word, Saltmere. Tomas stared at it for a long time. Saltmere wasn't a place he knew well, only something he'd heard about from travelers who passed through. It was said to be a village near the coast, once thriving from salt trade, now mostly forgotten. But it still had a small abbey, a few fishers, and a market that opened twice a month. It was far, far enough that someone could disappear there, or hide. It had to be a message. Tomas knew what he had to do. But how? He spent that night restless. He couldn't tell his parents. Not yet. They wouldn't understand, or worse, they'd worry themselves into keeping him trapped in the village. But he also knew that doing nothing would gnaw at him forever. He needed more than curiosity now. He needed a plan. So he started listening. In the days that followed, he paid attention to every conversation, every cart that passed through, every merchant who stopped to sell barley or wool. Most of it was nothing. Talk of rain, broken wheels, spoiled ale. But then came a traveling tanner with stained hands and a sharp tongue. Tomas heard him say something about heading to Saltmere for hides. The abbey buys in bulk, he'd said. Can't afford not to. They've got pilgrims again. Tomas followed him to the edge of the village and asked, with as much courage as he could fake, "Do you need help loading your cart?" The man squinted at him. "You strong? Stronger than I look. Quiet. Yes. Don't eat much." Tomas grinned. "Almost nothing." The man snorted. "All right then. Be ready before dawn. We leave early. Tomas didn't sleep that night. He packed what little he had, a bit of cloth for warmth, a chunk of stale bread, and the pouch Lena had given him. He stared at it for a long time before tucking it deep into his shirt. He didn't know if the spices were rare, or valuable, or just sentimental, but he knew they were a link to her. And if she really was in Saltmere, he had to find her. The journey was long and bumpy. The tanner wasn't a kind man, but he wasn't cruel either. He didn't talk much, which suited Tomas fine. They passed through woods that looked like they'd never been touched, crossed bridges that creaked like old bones, and rode past villages smaller than his own. Food was scarce. They shared thin gruel by the fire, gnawed on dried meat that made his jaw ache, and once a crumbly cheese that tasted like chalk. Even on the road, food didn't get much better. But the hunger didn't matter. The closer they got to Saltmere, the more alive Tomas felt. By the time they reached the village, it was late afternoon. The sky was smeared with orange and purple, and the air smelled of sea and salt. Tomas had never seen the ocean before. It looked like the world just stopped, like God had poured water across the edge of everything and dared it to spill. Saltmere was quiet. The streets were wide, but empty. Wooden homes leaned from the wind, and the abbey stood crooked on a hill, surrounded by bent trees and half-buried gravestones. The tanner pointed toward the market square and grunted, "Unload. Then go." Tomas nodded and did as he was told. By the time the cart was empty, the sun had dipped low, and the wind had grown cold. He was on his own now. He wandered the streets slowly, unsure where to begin. He checked the tavern first, a crooked old place with bad ale and worse music, but Lena wasn't there. Then he circled the abbey, but the monks ignored him. He watched the market stalls being packed up, caught a whiff of roasted fish, and nearly wept at the smell. It reminded him that hunger wasn't just something you lived with. It was something that shaped every choice, every risk, every dream. And then, at the edge of the market, near a stall that sold sea glass and shells, he saw her. Lena. She wore a different tunic. Her hair was shorter. She stood behind the stall like she belonged there. But it was her. Tomas stepped forward, heart pounding. She looked up. Her face didn't change. No smile. No shock. Just recognition. She motioned him to stay quiet. And then, just as she reached for a cloth to cover the stall's table, she whispered without turning her head, "You shouldn't have come." Tomas blinked. Why? But she didn't answer. She only gave him a folded piece of parchment. Her hand brushed his for half a second. Then she walked away. He stood in the middle of the market as the wind picked up and the sky turned dark. Alone again, with questions piling in his mind like storm clouds. And when he finally opened the note, 3 words stared back at him, written in hurried ink. "They're watching me." Tomas didn't know who they were. But suddenly, food wasn't the only thing that was dangerous in the medieval world. Tomas folded the note carefully and slipped it into the lining of his tunic, heart pounding so loud he thought others might hear it. "They're watching me." The words looped in his head over and over as the wind blew harder off the sea, flapping tents and rattling shutters. He looked back toward the stall where Lena had stood, but she was gone again, vanished into Saltmere's winding alleys and shadows like she had in the village before. He couldn't chase her, not with so many eyes around. Merchants were closing up, fishermen were dragging in their nets, and 2 guards in worn leather stood near the old stone fountain at the center of the square. They weren't manor guards like Auric, but they looked like they took orders from someone powerful. And they weren't watching the sea, they were watching the people. Tomas ducked into a narrow side street, the kind where the buildings leaned so close they almost touched. He needed to think. Why would anyone watch Lena? She was just a kitchen girl. Or at least that's what he had believed. But things weren't adding up anymore. She had access to manor food. Sure, she knew about spices. But what else was she part of? And what had she taken? He found a quiet spot behind an abandoned cart and crouched down. The street was silent, except for the distant sound of gulls and the creak of salt-rusted hinges. From his pocket, he pulled out the old linen pouch again. He untied the string and looked at the mix of spices inside. Pepper, maybe nutmeg, a flake or 2 of something reddish like saffron or paprika. He still didn't know what half of it was, but someone would. That was when he remembered something Lena had said, They eat to impress, not survive. The manner food, the performances, the decorations, it wasn't about taste, it was about power. So what if she hadn't stolen food at all? What if she'd taken knowledge? A recipe? A formula? A spice blend worth its weight in gold? Tomas stared at the pouch again. Maybe it wasn't what was inside that was so valuable, but what it represented. In a world where meals marked social rank, knowing how to make something rare, something exotic, could mean influence, trade, control, or even betrayal. That night, Tomas stayed in the shadows. He used a few coins the tanner had tossed him to buy a crust of bread and a chunk of smoked fish from an old woman by the harbor. It was the most flavorful thing he'd tasted in months. Briny, rich, layered with something unfamiliar. He asked what was in it, and she smiled with no teeth. Cloves, she whispered, and dried orange peel. Learned it from a sailor once. Never told my husband. Took the secret with me when he died. Secrets. Always secrets with food. In Saltmere, even a fish recipe could carry a ghost. Tomas found a place to sleep under the eaves of an abandoned mill. The wind kept him awake. That and the thought of the two guards. Of Lena's face when she saw him. Of her voice, soft, urgent, frightened. At dawn, he went back to the market. The stalls were quieter in the early morning, with only a few vendors setting up. He looked for Lena again. She wasn't at the sea glass stall. He walked the perimeter, trying not to look like he was searching. And then, behind the abbey, he saw her again. She stood in front of a small herb garden, holding a wooden basket. She looked like any market girl preparing for the day. But when she spotted him, she didn't smile. She didn't wave. She only glanced at the path behind the abbey and nodded slightly. He followed. The path wound uphill, behind crumbling stone walls and mossy steps. At the top was a grove of old trees bent from sea winds. Lena waited behind one of them, sheltered from view. You shouldn't have followed me, she said, her voice low. You left a message. I left a warning. Tomas stepped closer. What did you take? She looked away for a moment, then back at him. Her eyes were sharper now, more cautious than curious. Do you remember the bread I left you? He nodded. It wasn't just bread, she said. It was a test, to see if you noticed the difference. If you could taste it. I could, he said. It was better. She nodded. It was baked with a spice mix from the Eastern traders. Not something most manor kitchens use. The Lord got it in secret, off the books. Said it was from Venice, but I think it came farther east. He didn't want the church to know. Tomas frowned. Why? Because it was meant for a guest. A very special one. Someone important. Someone who wanted a certain kind of food, a specific recipe that proved a connection. To what? To a secret trading circle, she said. Spices, recipes, medicines, hidden routes. The food was only a sign, a password and flavors. If the dish was made correctly, the guest would know they were safe. Tomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. So you took it? She nodded. The blend. The parchment with the ratios. I copied it. Why? Because I don't want to serve people who use food like a weapon. He didn't know what to say. She stepped closer. That's what they're doing, Tomas. Spices, herbs, preparation. It's not just about taste. It's about loyalty. A stew can say who you're loyal to. A sauce can mark you as part of something dangerous. Tomas thought of the manor guests. The wine-soaked meats. The sauces that covered spoiled cuts. The pies shaped like animals. It had always felt like theater. He hadn't realized it was also code. Lena reached in her basket and pulled out a small scrap of parchment. This is what they're looking for, she said. They don't know I made a copy. Tomas took it. The handwriting was cramped and spidery, but it was clear. A mix of cloves, cinnamon, dried fruit peels, vinegar, honey, mustard seed. Ratios. Timings. Notes on temperature and texture. It's just a recipe, he said. No, she replied. It's a message. And in the wrong hands, it's a signal that could start something terrible. Tomas looked up at her. So what happens now? She hesitated. Now I leave. For good. I've heard of a monastery inland. One that collects rare herbs and writes about food honestly. They take in women who can read and write, who understand plants. I'll be safe there. And me. You go back. I can't, Tomas said. Not now. She searched his face, then nodded. Then come with me. but you have to decide fast. The next cart leaves by midday. Tomas looked down the hill, toward Saltmere, toward the market, the sea, the guards. He could still feel the linen pouch tucked in his shirt, still smell the fish from last night, still remember the knock on his door in the village and the first taste of white bread. He didn't know much, but he knew he couldn't go back to barley and silence. He looked at Lena. "All right," he said. "Let's go." But as they turned to head back down the path, a voice called out behind them. "Not so fast." They froze. Two men stood at the edge of the grove. One of them wore the same cloak as the garden square. The other held a piece of parchment in his hand, unfolded, exposed. Tomas recognized it immediately. It was the recipe, and the man was smiling. Lena's breath caught as the man holding the parchment stepped forward, his boots crunching over the frost-kissed grass. He was tall, lean, and carried himself like someone who never worried about the law, because he worked above it. His eyes were cold and narrow, not the kind that wandered or forgave. Tomas could tell he wasn't just another guard. He had the look of someone who knew things, too many things, and used knowledge like a blade. "Well," the man said, waving the parchment slightly, as if it were a handkerchief. This little note caused quite a stir. Tomas stood stiffly. His legs felt like wood, but he forced himself not to step back. Lena was silent beside him, but he could feel the tension in her shoulders. "You two have caused trouble," the man went on. "Missing supplies, broken trust, curious footprints in places they shouldn't be." His smile was thin. "But you've also confirmed something we suspected." Lena's voice was quiet but steady. "What do you want?" "Oh, I don't want anything from you now," he replied. "But someone else does. Someone who values order, control, secrets staying buried." Behind him, the other man shifted slightly. He was younger, dressed more plainly, but his hand rested firmly on the hilt of a short sword. A warning without words. The parchment fluttered in the breeze. Tomas felt every heartbeat, as if each one asked a new question he couldn't answer. He looked at Lena. Her face was pale, but not afraid. Not exactly. She was calculating, thinking ahead, always one step away from vanishing again. "Why are you following us?" Tomas asked, his voice more uncertain than he wanted. The man tilted his head. "Because you two are nosing around a part of the world most people wisely ignore. Recipes, trade routes, spice imports, they seem harmless, don't they? A pinch of this, a dash of that. But when the wrong dish is served at the wrong table, people notice." He took another step forward. "That blend you copied? It was meant for someone very important. A man arriving from the Low Countries. Someone who recognizes the taste. It was more than a meal. It was a message that the manor was ready to ally with certain merchants. Ones who don't want the church involved. Ones who handle things quietly." Tomas glanced at Lena, his chest tightening. The blend wasn't just rare, it was dangerous. Not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. It was a symbol of loyalty to people who traded more than just spices. Power moved in whispers, and meals were used like signatures. A stolen recipe then wasn't theft. It was betrayal. "You can't stop people from learning," Lena said, her voice sharper now. "You can't control flavors forever." "Oh, but we do," the man replied. "Every day. Some kitchens burn books instead of baking bread. Some cooks are watched more than the priests." Tomas could barely breathe. The trees around them felt like they were closing in. Every rustle sounded like another footstep. Every gust of wind chilled his spine. "What do you want from us now?" Lena asked again. The man tucked the parchment into his coat, finally folding it as if it were no more important than a napkin. "Nothing. Not yet. But you should both be aware there are others asking questions. Smarter ones. Less patient ones." He turned and walked back toward the path, his companion following. Just before they disappeared over the rise, he added without looking back, "Be careful what you cook. Be careful who tastes it." And then they were gone. Lena exhaled slowly. Tomas realized his fists were clenched. He opened them, shaking slightly. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I didn't know it was that serious." "I didn't either," she replied. "Not at first." They stood in silence for a while, the cold wind brushing past them. The grove, once just a place of trees and quiet, now felt like the center of something much larger. Something ancient. Hidden. Lena turned to him. We need to leave. But where? If they're following us, if they know what we took. Then we go deeper, she said. We find out who they are, what they're protecting. I have an idea where it started. Tomas looked at her, uncertain. Where? There's a monastery, she said. Not the kind that's open to pilgrims. It's older. It was once part of the spice guilds before they were broken up. They have archives, maybe even the original blend. If anyone knows what that recipe really means, it's them. He hesitated. Will they help us? I don't know, she admitted. But we don't have many options. Tomas nodded. He didn't like the idea of traveling again. Not when they were being watched, but it was better than standing still. The road ahead was uncertain, but so was everything behind them now. Later that day, they left Saltmere quietly, not through the market or the harbor, but through the worn shepherd paths that twisted through the coastal woods. The sky hung low with clouds, and the air smelled of salt and damp earth. Lena led the way, her pace steady but quick. Tomas followed, trying to ignore the feeling that eyes were still on them, even here. That night, they camped near a stream. They didn't light a fire. Instead, they sat in the dark, wrapped in cloaks, sharing a crust of hard bread and a few sips of water. Every crack of a twig made Tomas flinch. Every hoot of an owl felt like a warning. Do you think they'll follow us? He asked. They'll try, Lena said, but they don't know everything. Not yet. What about the people they work for? She paused. That's what I want to find out. Who's really behind this? Because someone higher than the manor lord wanted that recipe used. Someone who knew it would be recognized. That means this goes beyond the village, beyond the coast, maybe even beyond the kingdom. Tomas stared at the sky. The stars were barely visible through the clouds. He tried to remember the taste of the pottage he grew up eating, the blandness of it, the way his mother stirred it slowly every day. He thought about how different it was from the fish he'd eaten in Saltmere, about how flavor could carry meaning, about how one stolen blend could unravel secrets hidden for years. He wasn't just following Lena anymore. He was part of it now, whatever this was. And as they drifted into uneasy sleep, the wind picked up again, rustling through the leaves, whispering through the trees. And somewhere, far behind them, another kitchen fire was being lit. Another cook was preparing a meal with care. Another guest was arriving, and someone was still watching. By morning, the forest felt heavier. The kind of weight that comes not from weather, but from silence that stretches too far. Tomas rose with a sore back and stiff legs, blinking against the dull gray light filtering through the trees. Lena was already awake. She stood by the stream, splashing water on her face, her eyes locked on something distant, something he couldn't see. He joined her quietly. Did you sleep? Enough, she said. Do you think they're still following us? She didn't answer right away. Not close. But yes. They packed quickly. No fire. No breadcrumbs. Just careful footsteps along the forest path. Lena had a small charcoal-marked scrap of cloth, an old map, half torn and water-stained, but still useful. She traced their direction toward a marked hill several days inland. The monastery's near here, she said, pointing to a circle. It's carved into a cliffside. I've only heard about it from a spice merchant who stayed at the manor. He called it the Mouth of Stone. Tomas raised a brow. That's a name. They say the monks inside don't speak to outsiders. Not unless you bring something valuable. He touched the linen pouch still hidden beneath his tunic. Will this be enough? It has to be. They walked all day. The land shifted from flat coast to uneven ridges. Thorn bushes tugged at their clothes, and tree roots clawed at their boots. They stopped only once for a handful of dry berries Lena had picked near the stream, and kept going. Their path twisted away from familiar roads, away from voices, towns, and watchful eyes. By dusk, the path narrowed to a goat trail. That's when they saw it. The monastery. It rose like a shadow from the side of a craggy hill. The building looked half swallowed by the rock itself, with narrow stone windows, crumbling edges, and a great wooden door carved with patterns Tomas didn't recognize. No signs, no flags, no sound, just a stillness so complete it made his skin prickle. Do we knock? He asked. Lena didn't respond. She walked straight up to the door, pulled a small bell string hidden by ivy, and waited. The sound was dull, just one chime. Nothing happened for a long while. Then the door groaned open, not wide, but enough for a single robed figure to step out. He was tall and thin, with a hood that hid most of his face. His hands were pale, stained faintly with ink. When he spoke, it was with the soft rhythm of someone who rarely used words. "You are not pilgrims." Lena stepped forward. "We bring knowledge from the manor kitchens of Lord Pharaoh, and a recipe that was meant to be buried." The monk tilted his head. "Many things are buried here." She pulled the parchment from beneath her sleeve and held it out. He didn't take it. Instead, he said, "Follow me." The door opened wider. They stepped inside. The interior was colder than the forest. Dim light flickered from narrow slits in the stone. The floors were uneven, old. Not much furniture, just long benches, shelves of dried herbs, and in the distance, the faint sound of a quill scratching across parchment. They passed rows of clay pots, hanging bundles of thyme and lavender, and an entire wall covered in drying roots. "This place is older than salt law," the monks said as they walked. "Before spices were taxed, before borders were drawn, our order kept records, recipes, remedies, blends of flavor once used to heal or harm." Tomas glanced at Lena. Her face was unreadable. At the end of the corridor, the monk led them into a narrow chamber lit by a single glass lantern. Inside was a low table, an iron kettle, and a scroll case sealed with black wax. The monk gestured to the parchment in Lena's hand. "Let me see it." She passed it over. He unrolled it slowly. His fingers paused at each line, measuring the ink, the spacing, the ingredients. His brow furrowed. "This blend," he said, "was last seen in Ravenport. Before the fire, before the shipping guilds broke apart." "Ravenport?" Tomas asked. "Where is that?" "Nowhere anymore," the monk replied. "The city burned 20 years ago. A political quarrel, masked as an accident. But it began over food. Over this." He tapped the paper. "Why is it dangerous?" Lena asked. "What does it mean?" The monk looked up. "It means trust, or betrayal, depending on who tastes it." He walked to the far wall and pulled a thick book from a shelf, the leather peeling with age. Inside, he flipped to a page with a familiar set of ingredients, similar to Lena's, but with an extra note written in another language. He pointed. This version was used to signal alliance between trading houses across the southern ports. When a merchant shared it with another, it meant an offer of loyalty, safe passage, shared profits. But the recipe was kept secret, passed only in whispers, written in code. Tomas leaned in, and if someone stole it, they could fake allegiance, or expose the alliance to enemies. When Ravenport fell, it wasn't the flames that started it. It was a feast. Someone served the wrong dish to the wrong man. It told a wrong story. The monk looked at them both now. "Your manor is aligning itself with someone. That blend was no accident. The guest it was prepared for. Do you know who?" Lena shook her head. "Only that the recipe arrived in a locked box. The steward wouldn't even open it himself." The monk walked back to the table and pulled a second scroll from the case. "There are layers of power here, not just in trade, in belief, in memory. The way you flavor a meal can mark you for death in some circles, can promise safety in others. Most will never know. Most eat blindly. But those who understand the code can rule it," Tomas whispered. The monk nodded. Lena stepped forward. "We don't want to rule anything. We just want the truth, and to stay alive." "You may have already asked too many questions," he said. "Then help us." The monk was silent a long moment. Then he carefully placed Lena's parchment into the scroll case, sealed it again, and tucked it away. "You may stay the night. Speak to Brother Cadian in the library. He knows more about Ravenport. But be careful what you read." Tomas frowned. "Why?" The monk turned back to them, his face half in shadow. "Because some recipes were never meant to be remembered." With that, he left them in the cold room, the door creaking shut behind him. Tomas sat heavily on the bench, his mind spinning. Everything he thought he understood about food, about life, about power, it was being rewritten in front of him. And it wasn't over yet. Lena stood still for a long moment. Then she turned toward Tomas. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I didn't tell you." He looked up. She pulled a second parchment from the lining of her boot. Smaller, older, folded a dozen times. This wasn't just about the manor's recipe, she said. It's about what I found beside it. She opened it slowly. The ink was faded, the handwriting different. But at the top, in careful letters, it said, "The recipe of the crownless table." Tomas stared. "What is that?" he whispered. Lena met his eyes. "I think it's the original." Tomas stared at the parchment, unsure whether to breathe or speak. The edges were frayed, the ink pale and rusted with time, but the title was unmistakable. Asterisk, asterisk, the recipe of the crownless table. Even the name felt strange in his mouth, like a phrase from a forgotten book or whispered legend. Lena held it gently, her eyes not leaving the page, as if she, too, wasn't quite ready to believe what she was holding. "What does it mean?" Tomas finally asked. "I don't know everything," Lena admitted, "but I know it's old. Older than the manor. Older than any kitchen ledger I've seen." The steward kept it hidden in a box beneath the main hearth. It was locked inside with the spice parchment. Tomas leaned closer. The handwriting on the page was smaller, more ornate. The ingredients weren't ordinary. This wasn't barley and onion soup or peasant stew. There were things he didn't recognize. Wild myrrh root, black fennel ash, stone fruit vinegar, amber honey. Measurements were written in strange units. Asterisk, asterisk, twists, asterisk, asterisk, knots and breaths. "This isn't just a meal," he murmured. "No," Lena said softly. "It's something else. A message, maybe, or a ritual." Tomas looked at her. Why was it called the crownless table? She hesitated. "The merchant who visited the manor last spring. He told the steward something. I overheard part of it. He said, to share the crownless recipe is to invite trust without title, power without name." The steward didn't respond, but he locked that box tighter than anything else in the manor. "So it's for rulers?" "No," she said. "It's for those without them." Tomas felt a chill. The idea of a secret code, a message passed through flavor, was strange enough. But now it felt even bigger, like a hidden order. A gathering of people who use food not just for trade, but to build alliances without kings or lords. Without permission, Lena folded the paper again and tucked it away, just as the heavy door creaked open behind them. A shorter monk stepped in, this one older, with gray eyebrows like wisps of smoke. His voice was kind but tired. "I am Brother Cadian. I was told you carry memories written in ink and spice." Tomas rose. "We're looking for the truth." The monk nodded slowly. "Truth is heavy. Most people prefer broth." They followed him down a narrow corridor, deeper into the monastery. The walls here were darker, the air thicker with the scent of herbs and wax. Eventually, they reached a small arched door carved with vines and symbols. Cadian pushed it open, revealing a chamber lined with books, hundreds, maybe thousands, stacked on shelves in piles, even hanging in satchels from wooden beams. "This is our archive," he said. "We keep records of every known recipe from the days before the crown." Tomas blinked. Before the crown? Cadian smiled faintly. Before kings ruled kitchens. Before bishops taxed spices. When food was a language shared between those who wanted peace. Lena stepped forward. "We think someone is trying to bring it back. Or twist it." She handed over the copy of the manor's recipe. Cadian studied it carefully, his eyes scanning the ratios, the footnotes, the ink. Yes. This is a version of the crownless blend. Simplified, not ceremonial, but close enough to signal intention. Intention, Tomas asked. To rebuild a table without kings, the monks said. Or to pretend to. Lena frowned. "What do you mean pretend?" Cadian sighed and sat down at a small writing desk. This recipe was once used only among wandering cooks, healers, and peace brokers. They traveled across regions torn by war, preparing food that helped feuding groups talk. They brought warmth, flavor, and neutrality. But as the blend spread, some used it for false promises. They served it to gain trust, but only until they took what they wanted. So it became dangerous, Tomas said. "Very," Cadian replied, "because flavor carries memory. If a man is poisoned after tasting this, others will never trust it again." Tomas thought about the guests at the manor. The way meals were arranged like battles, dish by dish, flavor by flavor, and how Lena had risked everything to steal not a jewel or gold, but a parchment soaked in flavor. "What happens if this recipe spreads again?" he asked. "That depends," Kadian said, "on who wields it." Lena's voice was quiet now. "We think someone's already trying. At the manor. Maybe beyond." Kadian nodded slowly. "Then you'll need more than paper. You'll need the full recipe, and the story behind it. Not just the flavors, but the reason. Do you have it?" Tomas asked. The monk rose and walked to a narrow shelf near the ceiling. From behind a set of dried marjoram bundles, he pulled a thick, cloth-bound book. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. He set it on the table and opened it to a page near the center. There was again, asterisk, asterisk, the crownless table, asterisk, asterisk. The recipe was longer here, spanning 2 pages, with hand-drawn symbols in the margins. It wasn't just ingredients. It included a serving order, a location setting, and even rules for the number of guests. Each instruction was paired with a reason. For example, asterisk, 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 begin with bitterness, to acknowledge struggle. Asterisk, 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 follow with spice, to ignite hope. Asterisk, 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 end in sweetness, to leave peace behind. Asterisk, asterisk. Tomas leaned over it, stunned. "It's like a ritual, a ceremony through food." Lena whispered, "A philosophy." Kadian nodded. "Exactly. This isn't a meal. It's a statement." They sat in silence for a while, letting it sink in. Then Tomas asked the question that had been in his heart since the moment he tasted that first loaf of manna bread. "Why is food so important?" The monk smiled. "Because it's the only language everyone understands. The first thing we share, the last thing we hold. People forget laws, but they never forget how something made them feel when they were hungry." Lena glanced at Tomas. "So what do we do now?" "You've started something," Kadian said, "and that means you'll be followed, watched, maybe even hunted. But if you want to carry this knowledge, if you want to protect it, you'll need others." "Others like us?" Tomas asked. "No," the monk said. "Others who remember the old flavors, who still know the meaning behind a crownless table. Scattered cooks, hidden brewers, silent scribes. They're out there." Lena stood, straighter now, stronger. "Then we find them." Tomas followed her lead. "And we tell the truth, one meal at a time." Brother Kadian closed the book gently. "Then may your spices be strong," he said, "and your enemies full, but unsettled." The next morning, the monastery felt colder. Even though the sun had climbed into a dull gray sky, the corridors inside still carried a chill that wasn't just from stone and shadow. It was something deeper. Tomas could feel it, the weight of knowledge they weren't meant to have, the pressure of having seen something others wanted buried. They packed quickly. Brother Kadian gave them a satchel wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside were copies, translated notes from the original crownless table recipe, sketches of ingredients, and instructions passed down from those who had cooked in silence for years. There were also names, though only first names or symbols. "These are the ones who still remember," Kadian had told them. "They live quietly. Some are in the Northern Highlands. One is said to be near the old burned city. But none of them trust easily." Lena thanked him. Tomas did too, though part of him still wasn't sure what they had gotten into. He only knew that returning to the manor or staying in Saltmere was no longer an option. The moment they walked out of the monastery gates, it would all begin again. The watching eyes, the silent threats, the danger hiding in plain meals. By midday, they were on the road again. This time, heading north. They stuck to old paths used by shepherds and hunters, winding through forests that didn't show up on most maps. The journey was quiet, except for the occasional rustling of birds and the soft snapping of twigs underfoot. Neither of them spoke much. Lena walked with purpose. Tomas followed, replaying Kadian's words again and again. But as the days passed, their pace slowed. Supplies ran low. The small bits of dried fruit and salted root vegetables they'd taken from the monastery were running out. And though they foraged for what they could, the forest wasn't generous. Hunger returned like an old friend, one that had waited patiently in the corners of their stomachs. They reached a small hill town after 4 days of travel. It was called Bexlow, just a cluster of stone houses, a small mill, and an inn with smoke curling from its crooked chimney. The moment they stepped into the village square, Lena pulled her hood lower. "What is it?" Tomas asked. "Trouble," she murmured. "This is trading land. That means information moves fast here." Still, they needed food and a fire. The innkeeper, a round-faced man with a polite smile and nervous eyes, didn't ask many questions. But he noticed everything. The way Lena never took off her cloak. The way Tomas scanned the room before sitting. The way neither of them touched the bread offered with their stew. That night, while Lena spoke to a local healer rumored to know the name Cadian had given them, Tomas stayed in the common room. The fire was low. Two men in travel-worn cloaks played dice near the corner. An old woman stirred something in a kettle by the hearth, muttering to herself. One of the travelers looked up, stared a moment too long, then returned to his drink. Tomas didn't trust it. When Lena returned, her face was tight. "He's gone," she said softly. "The healer. Left a week ago. Headed toward the river valley. But what? He left a note. Someone else came looking before us. Said they were gathering old cooks. People who knew the crownless blend. Promised safety. Do you believe it? I don't know. But it means we're not the only ones searching." That night, it didn't sleep well. A dog barked in the distance. A door creaked once, then didn't close again. Tomas thought he heard footsteps near their window just before dawn. When they left the village the next morning, they weren't alone. They caught glimpses, just flashes of movement in the trees, the snap of branches, the sudden silence of birds. Someone was following, but not attacking. Not yet. Lena kept glancing back over her shoulder. Her hand hovered close to her satchel at all times. The one with the parchment. 3 days later, they reached the river valley. The land was wide and open, the wind sharp and unrelenting. They found a hut near the bend of the river, where a small wooden marker had been placed in the ground, an old sign of the Cook's Guild. Tomas knocked. The woman who answered was not what he expected. She was young, maybe in her 20s. Her sleeves were rolled, her hands dusted in flour, and she carried the same look Lena had when she worked in the manor kitchen. Focused, steady, aware of everything. "I'm Mira," she said, after Lena introduced them. "I've been expecting someone, but not two. You know about the blend?" Tomas asked. She nodded once. "I baked it last week. For a stranger. He said he was a merchant, but he asked too many questions." "What did you do?" Lena asked. "I lied," Mira said simply. "I told him the cinnamon was spoiled, that I had forgotten the order. But I saw his face when he left. He didn't believe me." Lena stepped forward. "We're not like him. We don't want to sell the blend or use it for control. We just want to protect it and understand it." Mira looked at her for a long time, then finally nodded. "Then you'll want to see this." She led them inside. Her hut was small, but filled with warmth. Herbs hung from the ceiling. A small loaf of bread cooled by the window. She opened a wooden chest near the hearth and took out a roll of parchment. "This was passed to me by my grandmother," she said. She was part of the last known circle, the ones who gathered to preserve the table's meaning, before they disbanded, before the guilds were dismantled. Tomas took the scroll and unrolled it carefully. It was different from Cadian's copy. This one had names, notes on hosts, a list of meals and who had been present when they were shared. "It's a record," Lena whispered, "of every crownless table. And every betrayal," Mira added. Tomas looked at one name near the bottom, crossed out in red ink. "Who is this?" Myra's expression darkened. "The one who gave it away. The one who first sold the recipe. He lives in the capital now. Works with the lords. Advises them on taste diplomacy. They call it culinary strategy. But he's poisoning meaning, turning meals into lies." Lena clenched her fists. "Then we have to stop him." Mira nodded. "Yes, but if you go after him, you'll be marked. He has eyes everywhere, and taste testers who know the blend better than anyone." "Then we need to learn more than they do," Tomas said. "We need to cook," Lena agreed. "But not for the lords. For the ones who still remember." Mira smiled faintly. "Then we start here, with bitterness. The first flavor." As she gathered her tools, outside the wind howled through the valley. Somewhere beyond the hills, other cooks were waking. Other spies were waiting, and the secret blend, the one recipe that could signal truth or spark war, was in the hands of two wanderers trying to keep the flavor of freedom alive. They stayed with Mira for 3 more days. In that time, the valley became their classroom. Each morning began before sunrise, when the frost still clung to the grass and the sky hadn't yet turned from gray. Mira would rise with a kind of silent rhythm, as if her body remembered things even before her mind did. Lena followed closely, watching how Mira stirred the coals, how she soaked and dried roots with care, how she ground seeds in a mortar as if every movement had a purpose. Tomas fetched water and tended the fire, watching the steam curl off the kettle as Mira worked quietly beside Lena. They didn't speak much during those early hours. The food did the talking. The first dish was bitter, just like the old instructions said. Mira explained as she prepared it that bitterness reminded the eater of struggle, of hardship. It was meant to bring a shared sense of memory to the table. Not everyone enjoyed it, but everyone understood it. This, Mira told them, was usually made from burnt barley, crushed with vinegar and wild herbs. Sometimes nettles or dandelion roots. Always sharp, always humbling. Tomas tasted it that night. The flavor bit his tongue, made his eyes sting slightly. He didn't like it, but he respected it. It made him remember hunger, winter, quiet desperation. Mira saw his reaction and nodded. You're supposed to feel that. The second dish was spiced, bold, unexpected. Cloves, black pepper, dried orange rind, and something called sunroot that Mira dried in thin slices. The smell alone warmed the room. Lena tasted it and closed her eyes. It makes you feel like something is coming, she whispered. Hope, Mira replied. This dish was always served before an agreement, when both sides needed to remember why they were sitting together at all. They took notes, not just of the ingredients, but of the ritual, when to serve each dish, how long to let the flavor linger, how many breaths between spoonfuls. Mira had learned all of it from her grandmother, one of the last true circle members, before the world began to forget. But on the 4th morning, things changed. Tomas woke before the others. The valley was still dark, the wind low. He stepped outside to relieve himself, but stopped when he noticed something strange, boot prints in the frost. Too large for Lena, not Mira's, and they hadn't been there the night before. He crouched low and followed them around the side of the hut. They vanished near a rock wall, where the frost had melted in patches, as if someone had stood there too long, hiding, breathing. He went back inside quietly. Mira, he whispered. She stirred, opened one eye. We're being watched. By the time Lena was up, Mira was already packing. We can't stay, she said. If they're close enough to scout, they're close enough to burn it down. But we haven't finished the teaching, Tomas said. You've learned the first 2? Mira replied, tossing bundles into a sack. That's more than most ever do. Lena hesitated. The 3rd dish, sweetness. We haven't touched it yet. Mira looked at her, eyes softening. That one you have to learn yourself. Sweetness is memory. It's personal. It's not about sugar. It's about truth. The final course is always made by the one who's lived the meal. They left just after sunrise, crossing the ridge behind the hut and following an old deer path Mira knew by heart. They moved fast, avoiding the main roads, ducking under branches and through shallow creeks to throw off anyone who might be tracking them. By midday, they reached a wide field with a broken fence and an old stone circle, crumbled with time, overtaken by moss. This was once a meeting place, Mira said, long before the kingdoms, before kitchens were divided by flags. They rested in silence. Tomas could feel something shift inside him. He had seen the manners food used to show. He'd tasted Lena's hidden bread. He'd watched Mira create a moment of memory with just a bowl of bitter herbs. He was beginning to understand why some recipes were protected, not because they were secret, but because they were sacred. We need to find the others, Lena said. The names from Cadian's list. If they're still alive. Mira nodded. They'll know what's happening. They'll know if this recipe is being used to unite or to conquer. But just as she spoke, a bird call echoed across the valley. Not a natural one. Tomas stiffened. That's the same sound I heard in Bexlow. Outside the window. Myra's face darkened. They've followed us. They moved quickly. Mira knew a way into the woods through a grove of birch trees. The white bark made it harder to be seen at a distance. They walked without speaking, every step careful, every sound magnified by nerves. But by dusk they were caught. Not by soldiers, not by guards, by a man in a dark cloak, standing in their path as if he'd been waiting all day. "I thought I smelled cloves," he said, smirking. Lena stepped in front of Tomas. "Who are you?" she demanded. He pulled back his hood. Middle-aged, thin beard, scar across his cheek. His eyes were sharp, hungry, not for food, but for what food represented. "Just someone with an appetite," he replied. Mira stiffened. "You serve the crownless table to traitors." He grinned. "I serve it to those who paid. History doesn't remember who sat, only who swallowed." "What do you want?" Lena asked. "Your copy," he said simply. "The original blend. The notes. Whatever Cadian gave you. Give it to me, and I'll let you go. You can live a long, dull life eating barley again." Tomas stepped forward. "You want to sell it?" "I want to own it," he said. "Control the story. Rewrite the past. Make the flavor mean something new. The crownless idea is old, but has power, and power tastes expensive." No one moved. Then Lena reached into her satchel and held up a rolled parchment. "You want it?" she said. "Come take it." The man didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, but Tomas moved faster. He kicked a cloud of ash from the fire pit into the man's face. Mira lunged, grabbing a heavy branch, striking his arm. Lena yanked the parchment back, and the man stumbled, coughing and cursing. "Run!" Mira shouted, and they did. Through the trees, through thorns and mud, hearts pounding like drums. Behind them, the man's voice roared with rage. But they didn't stop. Not until the trees thinned and the stars began to appear. Not until the parchment was safe in Lena's hands again. Not until Tomas turned to her, breathless, and whispered, "What now?" She looked at him, sweat, fear, and fire in her eyes. "Now we find a last cook," she said, "and we finish the table." They didn't sleep that night. The stars blinked high above, scattered across the black sky like cold coins, and the woods seemed to hold its breath around them. Lena, Tomas, and Mira sat close together, not by a fire. They couldn't risk the glow, but under a thick tree canopy with a blanket of leaves beneath them. The parchment was safe, wrapped tightly in a linen pouch and buried beneath a flat rock nearby, marked only by a single broken twig. Tomas kept watch first. His hand gripped a dull blade, not much good in a real fight, but enough to make noise or buy time. He listened for twigs snapping, for the rush of boots, for breath not their own. But the forest remained quiet. When morning broke, the light came slowly, bleeding gray into the sky. Mira was already awake. She was tracing something in the dirt, symbols from the scroll, perhaps circles and lines with tiny notes beside them. "I think I know where he's headed," she said quietly as Lena joined her. "That man, the one who tried to take the recipe, he's going to the capital, to the high table." Tomas frowned. "The king's kitchens?" Mira shook her head. "Worse. The Council of Tastes. It was formed after the spice riots years ago. They control official blends now. Every feast served to nobility, every wedding, coronation, treaty, it passes through them. They write laws and recipes." Lena's eyes narrowed. "So if he brings them the crownless blend, he'll claim it," Mira finished. "Say it was rediscovered, that he created it. He'll offer it as a unifying flavor for nobles. They'll drink it, toast with it, pass laws under its taste. And no one will ever know what it truly meant." Tomas leaned back, overwhelmed. "They'll rewrite the table." "Yes," Mira said, "and erase everything that came before it." Silence fell for a moment. Then Lena stood. "We can't let that happen." "No," Mira agreed. "We can't." Tomas looked between them. "But how? The capital's weeks away. And even if we reach it, they won't let people like us inside." Lena reached for the parchment. "Then we'll bring the flavor to the streets." Myra's brow lifted. "You want to cook?" "We don't need a palace," Lena said. "We need a pot, a fire, and hungry mouths. If they try to own the story, then we give it back to the people." Mira smiled faintly. "Then we cook like the Circle once did. In secret, in corners, in alleyways." Let the truth pass through taste. That afternoon, they headed south, not toward the capital directly, but toward the outer villages, places where word traveled fast and flavor traveled faster. Mira had an old contact in a town called Winmar's Bend, a woman who once smuggled saffron when the guilds banned it. She'll help, Mira said, and if she won't, her husband will. He owes me 3 favors. They traveled light. Tomas carried the scrolls tucked between layers of linen. Lena carried spice bundles Mira had dried before they left, the ingredients for the full crownless course, prepared in secrecy. They reached Winmar's Bend in 5 days. It was a modest town, perched beside a bend in a river, its wooden bridges creaking under carts and horses. People eyed them curiously as they entered, but not unkindly. Food smells drifted from chimneys: roast root, turnip pie, stale bread soaked in broth. Mira led them to a crooked house with a red door. She knocked twice, waited, then knocked again. The woman who answered was wide-shouldered, with strong arms and a scar on her neck. Her eyes flicked from Mira to Lena to Tomas, and then back to Mira again. "You're late," she said. "And you're not nearly as old as you said you'd be," Mira replied dryly. The woman let out a soft laugh and opened the door. Her name was Farah. She and her husband Durin ran a tiny food stall near the river, mostly selling stew and roasted bread to ferrymen and river traders. But below the floorboards of their home was a second kitchen, hidden, cramped, and filled with forbidden ingredients. Tomas was stunned. He'd never seen so many spice jars in one place: tiny vials of cardamom, ginger paste, dried lemon, long pepper, and one jar labeled only memory salt. "We used to cook for the hidden," Farah said as she lit a flame under a battered pot. "For the ones chased out of courts. For the cooks who refused to serve poisoned alliances." Mira explained the plan quickly. Farah listened, stirred her pot, and nodded. "We serve in the market," she said. "Tomorrow morning. No sign, no coin required. Just taste. We might draw attention," Tomas warned. Farah smirked. "Good. Let them come hungry." That night, they prepared everything. Tomas cut roots and ground seeds under Myra's guidance. Lena measured precise amounts, using breaths and pinches, never spoons. Farah stewed bitter greens in a pot so wide it nearly brushed the fire's edge. Mira added the spice course, an orange broth with notes of heat and citrus, and Lena saved the final course for last: honey bread with dusted thyme, slow-roasted fig, and a final drop of citrus vinegar. Not too sweet, just enough to remember. "Sweetness is memory," she whispered as she stirred. "We have to remind them what this flavor once meant." When morning came, the market filled as usual. Vendors called out prices. Children darted between carts. Smells of fish and cheese hung in the air. But at the far end, near the old well, Farah's table waited. No signs, no banner, just 3 pots and a stack of wooden bowls. People came slowly at first. An old man curious about the smell. A young woman tugged by her child. A merchant who looked over his shoulder twice before approaching. Then they tasted. The bitter first course made them frown, made them nod slowly. The spicy second dish made them pause. Eyes widened. Some smiled. The final sweet dish made them close their eyes. By noon, the crowd had doubled. By afternoon, it had tripled. Someone asked for the recipe. Farah shook her head. "You can't write it down. You have to carry it." But someone had written it down, and someone else had seen. Near the edge of the crowd, a man in dark robes stood watching. He didn't speak, didn't taste, just watched. When Tomas met his eyes, the man turned and vanished. "They know," Tomas said. "Yes," Lena replied. "But so do the people." They cleaned up quickly, left the stall as if it had never been there. Farah hugged Mira, slipped her a tiny pouch of cloves, and disappeared into the alleys with Durin. By nightfall, word had already spread. Someone had served a forbidden meal in the open. Someone had brought back a forgotten flavor. And though the lords in the capital still prepared their own version, still sat in golden halls writing fake histories with cinnamon and wine, the people were already tasting something different, something older, something true. The city gates loomed tall ahead of them. They didn't shine like Tomas had imagined as a child. There was no gold or grandeur, just soot-darkened stone and guards who didn't blink twice when travelers passed through. But Lena felt it. A weight, a tension in the air, as if the whole capital was waiting for something to happen. News of the dish they had served in Winmar's band had beaten them here. Whispers had moved faster than footsteps. In the alleys behind bakeries and fish stalls, people were talking about a strange trio who had cooked without asking permission. In the poorer quarters, near the river docks, some were already trying to recreate the dish. Most got it wrong. Too much salt, not enough bitterness, but the idea had spread. And ideas were harder to control than spices. Mira led them through the winding streets. She knew where to avoid eyes, which doors to knock on, who to trust. They stayed in an old storeroom above a miller's shop, dusty, loud, but safe for now. From the window, Tomas could see the palace dome in the distance. That was where the Council of Taste gathered, where men and women in silks argued over flavor like it was law. "We're running out of time," Lena said as they unpacked. "If he presents the crownless recipe as his own, it'll be accepted as fact. Once it's served at a council banquet, it becomes official. And everything we've done," Mira added, "gets buried under linen and ceremony." Tomas looked out the window again. "So we interrupted." Lena blinked. "The banquet?" "Yes," he said. "We don't have to stop them from eating it. We just have to serve it first, in front of everyone. The real version." Mira paced the room. "We'd never get in. Not through the main doors." "Then we don't go through the doors," Lena said quietly. There was silence. Mira finally looked up. "There's a spice tunnel." Tomas turned. "What?" "It's old," she said. "Used when nobles wanted rare ingredients brought in without being taxed. It leads straight to the council kitchens. I never used it myself, but I know where the entrance is." Lena's heart was pounding. "Then we go tonight." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Mira wrote down everything. Every detail of the crownless blend, every step they had practiced in Winmar's Bend. Lena ground the ingredients by hand, her fingers aching by the time the sun set. Tomas practiced the serving order again and again, whispering each course like a story. They weren't just preparing food. They were preparing to tell the truth in the only language some people still understood. As darkness fell, they moved through the city like shadows. Mira led them past shuttered shops, down twisting lanes where torchlight didn't reach. They reached a narrow alley between a cobbler's stall and a wine cellar. Mira crouched and lifted a wooden grate. The tunnel was damp and tight. Cobwebs clung to the walls. The smell of old herbs and stone filled the air. Tomas carried the covered dishes in a strapped satchel on his back. Lena moved carefully, heart racing louder than her footsteps. The tunnel opened into the bottom level of the palace kitchens, just as Mira said it would. They could hear movement above them, trays clinking, voices arguing about timing, the smell of rich spices floating down through the cracks. But no one noticed them. Not yet. They waited. At the top of the next staircase was a wooden hatch. Mira cracked it open and peeked through. "They're plating now," she whispered. "He's there. The man from the valley. He's talking to the steward." Lena breathed in. "Then this is our only chance." They climbed out one by one. The kitchen was massive, more like a hall than a room. Dozens of cooks rushed about, too busy to notice three new figures moving toward the back. But the steward didn't notice. He turned, confused at first, then alarmed. "You're not on the list." Lena stepped forward. "We brought the crownless table." The room froze. All at once, it was as if every clatter and shout had stopped mid-air. Eyes turned. Hands stilled. Somewhere at the other end of the hall, the man from the valley, the one who had tried to take their parchment, stepped forward. He smiled. "You're too late." Tomas pulled back the linen cover on the tray. Steam rose. The real blend. 3 dishes. Bitterness. Spice. Memory. Lena raised her voice. "We bring the original version. Not rewritten. Not stolen. Not polished for noble tongues. The true meaning." Guards moved toward them. The steward barked something about orders. But before they could be stopped, an older woman in a judge's robe stepped down from the dais beside the great dining hall. "I want to taste it," she said. She was a member of the council. The guards paused. The man from the valley stepped in. "They're liars. Thieves. They've been spreading false blends across the villages. They've been feeding people," she said flatly. something we stopped doing a long time ago. She walked toward Lena and lifted a spoon from the tray. First, bitterness. She tasted it, and her eyes flicked upward as if remembering something. Then, the spice course. She paused, nostrils flaring. And last, the sweetness. She didn't say a word. She turned to the steward. "Serve this." "Not that," he stammered, "but the official recipe." She raised a hand. "Hasn't passed the test of the tongue." The hall erupted in quiet murmurs. The man from the valley took a step back, face paling. Tomas saw his hand twitch, like he was deciding whether to run or fight. Then, a second counselor came forward. Then a third. Each asked for a taste. And with each bite, the truth unraveled. Not in speeches, not in ink, but in flavor. Guards watched nervously. The steward stood frozen. Mira clutched the linen pouch close, the one that still carried the written proof. And Lena, she stood taller than Tomas had ever seen her, holding a ladle like it was a banner. But then, just as the fourth counselor raised a spoon to her lips, a door slammed open across the hall. A man in silver robes stormed in, flanked by palace guards with spears. He pointed at Lena. "They're not permitted here. They bring forbidden flavor. Arrest them." And just like that, the room shattered. Voices shouted. The guards surged forward. The steward turned to run. Dishes clattered. Tomas grabbed the tray, and Mira pulled at Lena's sleeve. But Lena didn't move. Not yet. Not until the taste of truth was heard. Lena stood firm as the guards moved in, her feet planted beside the table that now carried more weight than any crown. The silver-robed man's command rang through the kitchen like thunder, his words sharp and final. "Arrest them." But in that tense second, before orders became action, Lena lifted the ladle again, slow and deliberate, and dipped it into the last course. The spoon trembled only slightly as she turned toward the nearest counselor. "No crown gave this flavor meaning," she said clearly. "It came from people who ate in silence, who cooked in corners while rulers feasted. And you want to bury that." The guards hesitated. The older woman who had tasted first, her name was Lady Jerlin, stepped forward. She turned to the silver-robed man and spoke with quiet authority. "Do you know what this tastes like?" He scoffed. "Nonsense. Theater. Spiced water." "It tastes like the stories my grandmother told," Lady Jerlin said. "It tastes like the soup she made when our village nearly starved, like the fig bread she served the day we bury my brother." Her voice didn't waver. "It is real." The room shifted again. The tension didn't vanish, but it cracked slightly like thin ice underfoot. The man's eyes darted to the guards. "Seize the papers. Confiscate the blend." Tomas clutched the satchel tighter and moved behind Lena, eyes scanning for an escape. But there were too many doors, too many people. The kitchen had become a theater, a battleground, a stage. And the only weapon they had was flavor. Mira stepped forward now. She was shaking, but her voice was steady. "You can take the paper, but you can't untaste the truth. It's already in them." She gestured to the council members, still holding spoons. "Try rewriting their memories. See how far you get." One of the guards looked uncertain. Another lowered his spear slightly. The silver-robed man noticed. "Don't forget where your loyalty lies," he snapped. But Lady Jerlin turned toward the other counselors and said, "Maybe we have forgotten where our loyalty should lie. This city hasn't tasted honesty in years. All we serve now is strategy and ceremony." Lena stepped forward again. "You've turned food into politics, into a tool. But food is memory, connection. It isn't meant to divide." Her voice rose with each word, carried not just by truth, but by hunger, for change, for reckoning, for justice. The silver-robed man was losing ground, and he knew it. These people are insurgents. They broke into a royal kitchen. They walked through a tunnel built for smuggling illegal saffron to nobles. Lady Jerlin replied sharply. "Don't pretend this kitchen is pure." Mira looked to Lena. Tomas stood ready beside her. Lena turned to the council and said the only thing she could. "We will leave," she said. "We'll walk out if you allow it. But don't pretend we're the ones disrupting the order. That recipe wasn't created to overthrow anything. It was made to keep people alive, to bring enemies to the same fire." She held the ladle up. Taste it again. And ask yourselves, what are you really afraid of? No one moved. Then a spoon clinked softly against a bowl. One of the younger counselors, no more than 30, wearing rings but no crown, stepped up and tried the final course. She chewed slowly, swallowed, and whispered, "My mother made this when we were hiding in the western woods. I haven't tasted it in 20 years. The silver-robed man paled. Another counselor came forward. Then another. Soon the air was filled not with commands or accusations, but silence. Tasting, remembering. Tomas couldn't believe it. They had broken into the most secure kitchen in the kingdom. And now, instead of being dragged out in chains, they were watching the most powerful people in the land eat a recipe that had nearly vanished. But it wasn't over. The silver-robed man backed away. He turned, grabbed a kitchen boy by the sleeve, and hissed something. Lena's eyes snapped to the side entrance. "He's sending for reinforcements." "We have to go," Mira said. Tomas looked at the crowd. "If we leave now, they'll twist the story again," Lena said. But then Lady Jerlyn stood taller and turned to face the guards. "No one touches them. No one follows them." Her voice was a blade, sharp and final. "You don't command this hall," the man barked. "I do now," she said. And just like that, the power shifted. Guard stepped back. The kitchen stilled. Lady Jerlyn turned to Lena. "Go. You've done what we couldn't." Lena nodded once, eyes fierce. "We'll keep cooking. And we'll keep remembering," the lady replied. They moved fast, back through the tunnel before reinforcements arrived. The streets outside were just beginning to wake. Dawn lights spilled across the rooftops as the trio emerged near the river, breathless, covered in flour and sweat, but alive. Tomas exhaled slowly. "Did that just happen?" "It did," Mira said. "But it won't end there." Lena looked down at the ladle she still carried. "The blend's free now," she said. "Then so are we," Tomas replied. But even as they disappeared into the alleys once more, the taste of what had just happened lingered. Not just in the mouths of those they'd fed, but in the city itself. Something was changing, and the flavor of truth couldn't be put back in a jar. The city hadn't slept since the taste. Word of the rogue cooks spread faster than the morning fog, slipping through crowded taverns and across dockyards, reaching even the narrow chambers of the council. Everyone had a version. Some said the flavor made a councilwoman cry. Others whispered the blend could make you forget war, remember childhood, or even tell if someone was lying. None of it was entirely true, but none of it was entirely false either. Tomas, Lena, and Mira lay low in a fisherman's shed near the southern canal, just outside the city walls. They kept the parchment hidden, and Lena still carried the ladle in her satchel like it was a sword. Every sound outside made Tomas tense. Mira barely slept, always listening. But what none of them expected was what came 2 nights later. It started with a knock. 3 soft taps, spaced evenly. Not hurried, not random. They all froze. Then came a voice. "Low, calm. I know what you served." Lena moved toward the door. "Who are you?" "A friend of Farah's," the voice replied. "And someone you'll want to meet." Mira hesitated, then lifted the latch. The man outside wore a baker's apron, but his hands were stained with ink. He introduced himself simply. "I'm Kale. I work in records." That night, under a single lantern flame, Kale told them something they hadn't seen coming. "They're rewriting the archives," he said. "Not just the history books. The council is issuing new food registries. Ingredients, origins, even names of traditional dishes. They're renaming the Crownless Blend." Lena's face went cold. "What are they calling it?" "The Harmony Plate," he said. "They've tied it to a new peace treaty, and they're saying it was created by Lord Carvin." Mira slammed her hand on the table. "Carvin, that's the one who tried to steal it from us in the kitchens." Kale nodded. "He's claiming he discovered the lost recipe, that he refined it. He's already written essays about how it bridges regional flavors under noble vision. They've banned mention of the original term, crownless. Anyone caught teaching the traditional sequence is being fined. Or worse." Lena sat in silence for a long moment. Then she stood. "We'll serve it again." Tomas blinked. "Where?" "They'll expect us now." Lena turned to Kale. "Is the Harmony Plate being served yet?" He nodded. "The first official presentation is in 5 nights. At the Royal Treaty Feast. Then we serve it the night before, she said. Somewhere they can't ignore. Mira frowned. That means we'll need a crowd. And a platform. Cale leaned in. There's an old amphitheater near the Weaver Square. Abandoned. Cracked stone. But the acoustics still work. People pass by it every day. Lena nodded slowly. We light the fire there. We serve it once more. Not to nobles. Not to rulers. To the people. And this time, we don't disappear after. But Cale wasn't finished. There's something else, he said quietly. I looked deeper. Into older records, ones not yet changed. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded slip of parchment. The edges were singed. The ink faded. It's a list, he said. A secret one. Old names tied to the original crownless table. People who first used it as more than a meal. There's one name at the top, and it's familiar. He laid it flat on the table. Mira leaned in first. Her eyes widened. No, she whispered. Tomas looked. Then Lena. At the top of the list, written in tight ink, Cadian Vel. Tomas stepped back. Cadian? From the monastery? Cale nodded. He wasn't just a record keeper. He was one of the original stewards of the blend. The crownless table wasn't just a recipe. It was a code. Passed through food to relay hidden messages. Warnings. Secrets. Alliances. Lena's voice was low, and now it's being used to silence people. Yes, Cale said, which is why we have to do more than just serve it. We have to decode it. If Carvin presents the harmony plate with false ingredients, he might be erasing more than memory. He might be covering up messages buried in the original dish. Mira sat down, pale. If that's true, then every bite we served might have said more than we realized. Lena's mind was racing. The spice dish, the bitterness, the sweetness, the order, the timing. What if the ingredients weren't just symbolic, but literal signals? What if the entire blend had been designed not to taste good, but to pass information under watchful eyes? They had assumed they were preserving flavor, but they might have been protecting a language. And if Carvin presented a false version with even slight ingredient changes, those messages would become lies. We have to find Cadian, Lena said. We need to know the full code. Cale shook his head. I tried. The monastery was burned 2 days after you left. They say it was an accident. Tomas's heart sank. And Cadian? No body was found. Silence fell across the room. Mira whispered, then he's either hiding, or they're hiding him. Lena stood again, fire in her eyes. We go forward with the plan. We prepare for the amphitheater, but we also search for Cadian. If he's alive, he holds the key. And if he's not? Tomas asked. Lena didn't blink. Then we become the key. Outside, the wind shifted. Down in the streets, market stalls were closing, but voices carried into the night. People were already talking about the harmony plate, about the new peace meal, about how the council had once again tamed a wild recipe. But what they didn't know, what none of them could know, was that beneath every spoonful of sweetness, there might be a buried truth. And a real flavor? It was still waiting to speak. In the quiet hours before dawn, the Weaver Square looked like any other empty street. The broken amphitheater stood like a tired sentinel, its stone edges chipped by time, its stage dark. Pigeons fluttered through broken archways, and the last of the night's mist curled around empty stalls. But in the shadows near the north wall, Lena and Tomas unpacked bundles with careful hands. Every movement was deliberate, silent, heavy with meaning. They didn't speak as they laid out the fire pit, arranged the stacked bowls, and measured the ingredients Mira had preserved from the last batch. Nearby, Mira bent over the kindling, coaxing flame from damp wood. She looked smaller in the cold light, her face tight with focus. Tomas could see the worry in her brow, the questions she didn't voice. Someone will come, Lena said softly, not looking up. They always do. But the truth was, they didn't know who would show up. They'd left no signs, no maps, just whispers and breadlines. Hushed instructions slipped to traveling traders, coded phrases baked into crusts at trusted bakeries. One more taste. That's all they had said. Tomas finished setting the table. No decorations, no symbols, just simple wood and cloth. Nothing grand, but unmistakably prepared for something more than a meal. Then, as if summoned by that final touch, footsteps echoed in the alley. First one pair, then three, then six. A small crowd began to gather at the edge of the square. Men and women wrapped in cloaks. Children holding their mothers' hands. Two elderly women from the river quarter. A baker's apprentice with flour still in his hair. They said nothing, but their eyes watched every motion, every spice added, every ladle stirred. Mira served the first bowl. Bitterness. A hush fell as the first few people sipped. Some flinched. Some nodded slowly. One man wept without a word. It wasn't just a flavor. It was memory, struggle, everything that had been stolen and rebranded as harmony. Then came the spice. Warmth spread. It wasn't fancy. It was truth. Raw and bold. Familiar. And when the sweetness came, fig and thyme, vinegar and honey, it didn't offer comfort. It offered clarity. The crowd grew. They came by dozens now. Faces Lena didn't recognize. Some arrived wrapped in merchant garb. Others looked like they hadn't eaten in days. A few had eyes too alert, too trained. One stood apart. A man in a faded cloak with a limp and one gloved hand. He didn't approach the food, didn't speak, but Tomas caught him staring, not at the meal, but at Mira. His posture was tense. His right hand twitched, as if remembering something. Lena noticed too. "Tomas," she said quietly, "keep an eye on him." But before he could move, the man turned and disappeared back into the alley. Mira saw it. "He recognized me." "From where?" Lena asked. Myra's eyes were distant. "The old kitchens, before they burned. He was a steward shadow. Used to sniff every spice before it reached the table." "You think he's counsel?" Tomas asked. Mira shook her head. "Worse. I think he's the one who lit the match." The fire crackled. The next bowl was served. Then another. But tension grew. Word had clearly reached more than just the people. On the far edge of the square, for figures in dark uniforms appeared, silent, unmoving, watching. They didn't speak, didn't eat. "They're not here to taste," Tomas muttered. Lena nodded. "They're here to count and report." But the trio kept serving. They had no permits, no royal approval, just bowls, hands, and memory. By noon, the amphitheater was full. Then, a voice rose from the crowd. "Tell us what it means." A woman stepped forward. Not young, not old, her voice steady, her eyes tired. "The council says this is a meal for peace, but it doesn't taste like peace." Mira looked up. "That's because it isn't." She stepped to the center of the stone platform. The fire popped behind her. She didn't raise her voice, but everyone heard. This recipe was born during war, not to celebrate treaties, but to survive them. It was made by those who were silenced, who had to carry their truths in the only way they could, through flavor. Lena added, "The crownless table wasn't a menu. It was a message." The crowd shifted. Faces changed. What had begun as curiosity was becoming something else. Then another voice spoke, but not from the crowd, from the steps behind them. "Well said." The man who emerged was dressed in clean gray. Not royal robes, not streetwear. Neutral, controlled. Behind him stood the man from the kitchen, Carvin, and two others in the silver-gray garb of the council's internal guard. Carvin looked smug. The other man, his eyes cold, his mouth unreadable, stepped closer. "I'm Arbiter Hent," he said simply, "council keeper of traditions, and I am placing you under review." Gasps rose from the crowd. "Under what charge?" Lena asked calmly. Hent tilted his head. "Unauthorized dissemination of historic property. Use of protected culinary sequences. Subversion of established peace rituals." Tomas stepped in front of the fire. "You can't own a flavor." Carvin sneered. "You can when it's tied to policy, when it shapes how people remember." Mira stepped forward. "You're rewriting the truth." "No," Carvin said. "We're refining it. The original recipe was messy, divisive. We've made it elegant, palatable, and now it will serve to unite the region under common taste." Lena's jaw tightened. "You erased its meaning." Hent raised a hand. "Enough. This gathering is to be dissolved. Further acts of unauthorized cooking will result in detainment. This is your final warning." They turned to leave, but something happened. The older woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. No, just one word. Quiet. But it cut through the square like a blade. Another voice joined. No more stolen memory. Then a third. We remember what it really tastes like. The guards hesitated. Carvin looked uncertain. Then from the shadows, a figure stepped forward, hooded, slow, deliberate. Everyone turned. The man lowered his hood. Cadian, older, burned along one side of his face. Eyes tired but alive. I wrote the original blend, he said, and the square went silent. For a long second, no one moved. Even the guards held their ground, uncertain whether to grab him or bow. Cadian stood at the edge of the firelight, half in shadow, his face marked not just by scars, but by history itself. His voice had the weight of memory and the quiet power of someone who had seen everything lost and still come back to speak. I wrote it with my hands, he said again, taking slow steps toward the fire. But not alone. The crownless blend wasn't my invention. It was a record of stories from forgotten mouths. I wrote it down so the flavor wouldn't fade. And now you're telling me you want to file into a drawer and label it Harmony. Carvin took a step back, but Hent's tone remained flat. If you are who you say you are, you should have presented yourself to the council, not crept through alleyways like a criminal. Cadian smiled without warmth. If I had done that, I wouldn't be standing here. You don't preserve stories. You polish them until they shine, so bright no one sees the cracks. The crowd pressed in closer now. Dozens more had gathered since the first bowl was served. Some climbed on a broken stone benches to see. Others just stood still, their hunger no longer for food but truth. Lena's heart pounded. She stepped beside Cadian. Tell them what it really means, before they bury it again. Cadian nodded. His voice dropped lower, but somehow it carried farther. The bitter course represented famine. Not just hunger, but the decision between feeding your child or yourself. The herbs used were never chosen for flavor. They were chosen because they grew where nothing else could. He turned to the crowd. How many of you remember those days? Hands slowly rose. Old farmers, former soldiers, mothers. Cadian continued. The spice course was defiance. It came from ingredients smuggled across borders in seed pouches stitched into coats. It was never meant to impress. It was meant to remind that even in silence, there's fire. More nods, murmurs of agreement. And the sweet dish. He glanced toward the table, then to Lena. That one changed every time. Because memory is personal. Some used figure, some honey, some used nothing sweet at all. Because they'd lost it. He turned to Carvin now. You call this the Harmony plate. You want it to be one thing, one flavor, one message. But the crownless blend was never meant to be the same. It was made to be remembered differently. By everyone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Hent spoke again. It doesn't matter. You've broken a law. You've distributed a protected sequence. That alone is enough to revoke your trade rights and seize your documents. Lena's voice broke the air before he could finish. You'll have to take them from all of us. And she stepped forward, raising her ladle. One by one, others in the crowd stepped behind her. The baker's apprentice, the river women, a girl barely 12, holding clay bowl. They didn't hold weapons. Just spoons, knives, recipe scraps. All the things that had fed their families in the dark times. The guards looked uneasy. Carvin scowled. This is absurd. But Hent's eyes narrowed. If you do this, you become more than cooks. You become a rebellion. Lena didn't blink. Then maybe taste is how it starts. Suddenly, the fire flared. Mira had added dried orange peel and ground clove to the embers. The smell spread like a signal. And then, from the far side of the square, a new sound. Drums. Soft at first, then louder. Not a marching beat, but a cooking rhythm. Wooden spoons striking pots. Rhythm from alleyways, balconies, rooftops. The city had heard. All across the lower quarters, people were striking rhythm to the story they knew by heart. The taste they couldn't name, but never forgot. Carvin's face darkened. Hent turned to his guards. Disperse the crowd. End this now. But the guards didn't move. Not one. One of them, a woman with a stitched sleeve, spoke quietly. I ate this as a child. The bitter soup. My grandmother made it when we lost the orchard. I thought I'd dreamed the taste. Another added, My brother smuggled spice bark into the country and paid with his life. It's not just food. It's who we are. And then Cadian looked straight ahead. It's too late to erase it. Tomas stepped to Lena's side, and together they stood in front of the fire. The amphitheater was no longer abandoned. It was full, not of nobles, but of memory. But just as the tension seemed to shift, as if the crowd might win, one last twist caught them off guard. From behind the council guards, a new group entered the square. Soldiers, not city guards, not kitchen enforcers, real soldiers, bearing the crest of the Royal Food Command, the branch tasked with protecting state recipes, regulating edible contraband, and ensuring loyalty through controlled flavor distribution. 20 of them, armed. Their commander stepped forward. Young, confident. He didn't shout. He simply held up a scroll. By order of the Sovereign Taste Authority, he read, all unauthorized presentations of historical meals are to cease immediately. Confiscation orders are active. Resistance will be considered treason under culinary code. Lena's hands trembled slightly around the ladle. Cadian's voice was low. He's bluffing. Mira shook her head. No, this is real. This is the law they feared would be passed. Tomas stepped forward, voice tight. Then they've weaponized it. Cadian looked at Lena. What do we do? She swallowed. Then she whispered, we serve one more bowl, and stepped toward the fire. Lena stepped to the fire, not with haste, but with purpose, as if the ladle in her hand had turned to iron. The tension in the square was so thick, even the smoke from the embers seemed to hang mid-air. She stirred the pot slowly, bitterness, heat, and sweetness rolling together in the steam, and then filled a single wooden bowl. It wasn't polished. It wasn't pretty, but it was real, and she turned to the commander, who now stood in the amphitheater like a judge waiting to sentence the crowd. If you're going to silence us, she said, you should know what you're silencing. The commander didn't move. Lena stepped forward, stopping inches from the scroll in his hand. She offered the bowl. Everyone held their breath. For a long moment, the commander did nothing. Then he reached out, slow and unreadable, and took it. He sniffed it, looked into it, then finally he tasted it. He didn't react right away, but something in his eyes shifted. Something not rehearsed, not planned. And when he looked up, his voice had lost its edge. My mother made this, he said quietly, before the rationing. He looked down at the bowl again. I haven't tasted this since she died. Hent's face froze. Commander, but the commander held up a hand. He turned to Lena, and something in his face softened. Continue. Mira exhaled. Tomas stood straighter. The guards didn't lower their weapons, but their grips eased. The soldiers behind the commander exchanged glances. And then Cadian stepped to the fire too. This is the last bowl, he said to the crowd, but the first of its kind to be served freely in this city in over a generation. Take it, taste it, remember it, because what they wanted to call harmony, what they wanted to steal, was never about perfection. It was about truth. One by one, the bowls passed out again. No ceremony, no rules, just hands reaching for something that had been lost too long. Old women dipped bread into the spice broth. Children tried fig for the first time. And all across the amphitheater, eyes welled with memory. But even as relief settled over the square like gentle smoke, Lena noticed something strange. The parchment, the original scroll Cadian had carried back. It was missing. She glanced at Mira, who was now serving from a second pot. Tomas was organizing ingredients with Kale. No one had seen anything. No one had noticed. She scanned the crowd, her eyes darting between shoulders and hoods and cloaks. And then she saw him, Carvin, walking away, through the far edge of the square, unnoticed, blending into the dispersing people. In his hand, folded and hidden beneath his cloak, was the parchment. Lena didn't think. She pushed through the crowd, heart pounding, dodging shoulders and baskets and feet. She caught up to him just before he rounded the corner. Drop it, she said, breath short. Carvin turned slowly, smiling like he'd already won. I didn't need to rewrite the story, he said. I just needed the script. You saw what happened, she said. The people chose. They always choose what's served to them first, he replied. But give them time and packaging, and they'll forget who served it. Memory is short, but ink lasts longer. He held up the parchment, just enough to let her see. It was real. The folds, the faded edges, the exact curves of Cadian's handwriting. He had the original record. You won't get far with it, Lena said. Carvin's smile grew thinner. I won't have to. I've already delivered a copy. That moment hit harder than she expected, because she knew, once it was in the archives of taste, it could be filed, stamped, cited, and then distorted. But Lena stepped forward anyway. Then file it, she said. Put your seal on it. Rewrite it if you want. Just remember, she leaned in close. Your version doesn't taste the same. For the first time, Carvin's smile wavered. Then she turned and walked away. Back at the amphitheater, the last bowl had been served. The crowd was quieter now, thoughtful, reflective, but filled. The commander stood talking with Cadian. The soldiers didn't leave, but they didn't move to arrest anyone either. It was like a truce had been silently agreed upon, if only for a while. Later, as night fell and only embers remained, Mira sat beside Lena on the edge of the broken stage. The square was empty now, quiet again, like it had never held a moment that could shake a city. Do you think it'll last? Mira asked. Lena thought about Carvin's words, about the parchment, about how easily truth could be copied and twisted. No, she said honestly, not forever. Mira looked over. But it doesn't need to, Lena added, because now the people know what the real version tastes like. Tomas joined them, placing 3 worn bowls beside the fire. Then we'll just keep cooking, he said. Lena smiled faintly. And somewhere deep in the city's heart, in kitchens hidden and not, others would too. But miles away, in a high room lined with sealed jars and silent scribes, a new record was already being added to the archives. It looked like the original, but something small was just slightly off. By morning, the city was changed. Not in its buildings or banners, not in the rules etched into stone or the guards stationed at every gate, but in something deeper, invisible, private, in the kitchens, in the whispers. The amphitheater was cold now, cleared of fire and bowls, but its silence no longer felt empty. It felt full, like it was waiting for someone else to step forward, light another flame, and carry the story one meal further. But while the people remembered, in the high halls of the Sovereign Taste Authority, a very different kind of meal was being prepared. Inside a marble chamber shaped like a spoon, designed to honor the ancient first table, a handful of gray-robed scribes filed into place. Their job was simple: review any historical flavors before they entered the permanent record. They didn't eat. They didn't cook. They compared words, spices, ink, and that morning they were reviewing a new scroll, one submitted by Carvin himself, bearing his seal and the elegant title, Harmony Plate, a culinary blueprint for national unity. The scroll looked old, smelled like it had been carried through fire. Its folds and handwriting mirrored Cadian's original parchment in every detail, because it was the original, or at least a version of it. Carvin had kept his word. He hadn't rewritten the entire dish, but he had altered something. Tiny adjustments, not enough for most to notice. Instead of bitterness first, the sequence began with sweetness. Instead of fig and vinegar, it now suggested preserved pear and rosewater. Instead of spice that burned slowly, it recommended a softer blend for general comfort. And instead of a dish that varied, changed with memory and season, it was now locked, fixed, standardized, measured by units and timing. A repeatable experience for every citizen. The scribes read each line and murmured approval. It fit perfectly with the council's plan. Outside the chamber, Carvin waited, confident, polished. His cloak had been replaced with a silk robe that shimmered in the corridor's lantern light. He watched as servants polished plates with lemon rinds, preparing to replicate the dish for the next royal feast. But beneath that polished surface, Carvin was rushing, because despite his confident mask, he hadn't destroyed Cadian's original. He didn't dare. He'd hidden it instead, in a locked chamber inside the upper archives, behind scrolls no one touched, marked with a false date. It was safe there, forgotten, but real, because a part of him, no matter how ambitious, no matter how controlling, knew that Lena's words were true. The versions weren't the same, and one day, someone might taste both. Compare, question. But until then, he would serve his version. The harmony plate, glossed, smoothed, declawed, and he would rise. Meanwhile, in the low quarters of the city, Lena, Tomas, and Mira were moving again. They couldn't stay near the square. It was being watched now. But they weren't hiding. Not exactly. They were sharing. Each day, a different family hosted them in secret. Sometimes they cooked, sometimes they just talked. But wherever they went, people asked for the story. Not of the rebellion, not of the council's threats, but of the flavor. What was in the spice mix? Children asked. What did the bitterness remind you of? Older men whispered. And Lena always answered honestly. It tasted like the time we lost the harvest, and my father lit a fire just to keep the pot warm, even when there was nothing in it. Or Tomas. It reminded me of the night we got caught stealing onions, and the woman we stole from ended up feeding us instead. Mira. Mine changed every time. The people didn't want perfection. They didn't want safe. They wanted memory. And that terrified the council. So 2 days later, a decree was posted across the capital. All public meals must follow council-approved menus. All spices subject to inspection. No variations without permit. But the more rules they posted, the more bowls appeared. Outside bakeries, behind bathhouses, in hidden gardens, clay pots carried from house to house, wooden spoons dipped into memories too strong to kill. The crownless blend had survived famine, exile, and fire. Now it was surviving control. But Lena knew something was coming. Bigger than a feast. Bigger than a scroll. Something they weren't prepared for. She felt it first when Mira returned one night, breathless, pale, shaking. They're planning a global registry, Mira said, dropping into a chair. Not just here. The council's proposing a continent-wide archive of standardized meals. Tomas blinked. You mean like recipes? No, Mira said. Like identities. She opened a folded document. They want every region, every village, every family to submit an official food record. Their cultural dish, with no edits allowed after submission. They'll freeze it, lock it, and once approved, nothing else can be served at public gatherings. Lena stared at the page. So they'll define who we are by what we're allowed to cook. Mira nodded. And if we don't submit? Tomas read the fine print. Displacement, trade restrictions, denial of food aid. Lena looked at the ladle again. The same one she'd carried through fire, through the palace kitchens, through the square. And she realized this wasn't about food anymore. It never really had been. This was about memory being licensed, and stories being erased with flavorless ink. We can't stop this alone, she said. Mira stood. Then we find others. And they did. Across the next few weeks, Tomas drew maps in candlelight. Lena copied spice codes and story sequences. Mira traveled to outer villages. They found brewers, foragers, seed savers, underground chefs who'd preserved techniques no one remembered. In every region, someone held a thread. And one night, as snow threatened the rooftops, a girl no older than 15 came to their door with a jar of dried leaves and tears in her eyes. My grandmother made this tea, she said, but I don't know what it's called. They burned her book. Lena took the jar gently, sniffed it, then smiled. You don't need a name, she said. You just need the story. And the girl nodded, because maybe that was the new fight. Not against soldiers, but against forgetting. And while Carvin toasted his harmony plate in royal halls, served it on gilded silver, and gave speeches about the power of controlled culture, Lena stirred another pot by a street fire, with no name, but all the flavor of resistance. Snow began falling in the early hours, fine as sifted flour and just as quiet. It dusted rooftops and cloaks, drifted through broken shutters, and crept along cobbled streets. The city didn't stop moving. Markets still opened, carts still rumbled by. But the cold softened everything, muffled every sound except for the one that mattered most now. The scrape of a ladle against iron. Lena crouched over a blackened pot on the edge of a stone well. Her gloves were fingerless, her breath rose in clouds, and her eyes never left the slow swirl of the simmering broth. Behind her, Tomas was stacking firewood in a crooked pyramid, and Mira was checking the small scraps of paper that had been passed from house to house across the city. Crumbled messages scrawled with 3 words, "Come taste truth." By noon, they be ready. But Lena wasn't thinking about the crowd or the weather or the guards that now patrolled every alley looking for unauthorized assemblies. She was thinking about a memory, one she hadn't visited in years. A kitchen, long ago, her mother's hands, a pot that never seemed to boil no matter how long they waited. It hadn't tasted good, but it had tasted real. That's what she wanted now. Not to impress, not to win, just to remember. A sharp knock behind her broke her thoughts. Tomas turned. Two figures stood at the edge of the alley, hooded, cautious. One stepped forward and spoke low. "You're Lena?" She nodded. "We have something. Came across the border last night." Mira stood, eyes narrowing. "What border?" The taller figure pulled something from beneath his coat. A rolled piece of parchment sealed with wax. "We intercepted it before it reached the Central Archive," he said. "It's a final draft of the registry proposal. The full version. You'll want to see this." Lena took it with numb fingers, broke the seal, and unrolled it. Her eyes scanned the tight lettering. It was worse than she thought. Every region was assigned a number. Each number was paired with a single meal. And beneath each meal, an approval signature. In blank. The council hadn't just started locking flavor. They were assigning it by geography, tying identity to location. If you were from Region 14, you would eat this dish at public events. If you lived in Region 9, that dish. No substitutions, no local twists, and most of all, asterisk, no variations allowed, once approved, asterisk. Myra's voice was hollow. They're standardizing identity. Like we're inventory. They're flavor coding the map, Tomas said. One bowl per border. Lena's stomach turned. They'll erase generations with this. The shorter messenger spoke for the first time. "We've heard rumors. There's a group trying to stop it. Outside the city. Across the coast. They've preserved a library. Not books. Asterisk flavors. Asterisk a real archive. Recipes written by hand. Never copied." Lena's pulse quickened. "Where?" "They call it the kitchen below." Tomas frowned. "That's a myth. A cook's tale." "No," the taller figure said. "It's real. Hidden under an old vinegar factory. Not everyone gets invited. But if anyone can find it, it's you." Lena didn't hesitate. She looked at Mira. "Pack what we need." Mira didn't ask questions. She moved. Tomas stepped beside Lena. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "If we don't find the truth, they'll bury it under printed menus and pretend it never existed." By nightfall, they were gone. The road to the coast wasn't safe. The council had tightened checkpoints, disguised informants, and every cart crossing the outer gates was inspected for contraband. Asterisk, including spices, unregistered herbs, or undocumented recipe scrolls. Asterisk. They traveled by foot, through fields gone brittle with frost, through villages where people warmed themselves not with fire, but with shared soup, each one asking in whispers, "Asterisk, do you have a blend?" Asterisk, and each time, Lena would leave behind scrap, just a few notes, enough to recreate a version, enough to keep the memory alive. Days passed. Finally, they reached the coast, where wind bit harder and the scent of salt covered the smell of cooking. The old vinegar factory stood like a forgotten monument. Walls streaked with rust, roof broken open to the sky, barrels cracked and empty. It looked abandoned, but it wasn't. Mira found the first clue in a broken stone stair. A small wax eel with a crownless symbol, an open pot. They followed the marks down, through a dark cellar, past empty shelves, into a second door sealed with a rusted hook. And behind it, warmth. The scent hit them first. Not just food. History. Dried apples, fermented cabbage, crushed juniper, garlic oil. Layers and layers of memory stacked into the air itself. And then they saw it. A room no larger than a chapel, but filled, floor to ceiling, with flavor records. Scrolls. Scrapbooks. Handwritten logs. Spice maps. Brewing charts. Grandmother's notes on margins of baking pages. Mira stood frozen. "It's real." A woman stepped forward from the shadows. Tall, wrinkled, wearing an apron stained with 100 stews. "We've been waiting for you," she said. Lena blinked. "You knew we were coming?" The woman smiled. "We heard the ladle stirred again." They were led to a long bench beside an old stove. The woman poured them soup from a kettle blackened by time. It was simple, unnamed, but the flavor stopped Lena mid-bite. It wasn't just good. It felt like something. The woman spoke softly. Every time the council rebrands a dish, we add a version here. We don't try to stop them. We just make sure no one forgets the original. Tomas looked around. You've preserved everything? She nodded. Even the ones that hurt to taste. Mira reached for a scroll marked with a broken seal. It was titled *Bitterness, 1477. Lena leaned closer to the woman. The registry draft. They're assigning dishes by number. It's happening soon. I know, the woman said. And that's why we're preparing something. She reached beneath the stove and pulled out a locked wooden box. Inside was a scroll, older than any they'd seen. Its title, The Memory Meal. Lena traced the faded ink with her fingers. What is this? The woman answered gently. It's the dish that no one dares serve, because it contains all the banned flavors. Every note outlawed, every sequence made illegal. It's the last true meal, and once someone serves it again, the council's whole structure could crack. Lena looked up. Tomas whispered, "Then we serve it." Mira didn't smile. She simply said, "It's time." But even as hope sparked in their eyes, behind them in the shadows, another figure quietly turned and left the cellar, a small transmitter tucked into his belt. Because the council had been watching, and the final battle for flavor had just begun. Snow still covered the roads when they returned, but something in the city had shifted. People looked each other in the eye more often. Conversations lasted longer. Doors stayed open wider. Word of the underground archive, the kitchen below, had spread like the scent of simmering stew on a cold morning. Not everyone believed it was real, but everyone hoped it was. And that was enough. Lena, Tomas, and Mira didn't march through the gates in triumph. They walked in quiet, boots soaked from slush, carrying nothing but a satchel of spices, and the ancient scroll marked the memory meal. They didn't announce themselves. They simply found the square where it had all started, the amphitheater with its cracked stone and echoing air, and started building a fire. By midday, people noticed. Someone dropped off dry wood. Someone else brought bowls. A child offered her scarf to wipe the soot from the old pot. No one asked what was cooking. They didn't have to, because this time, it wasn't about taste alone. It was about reclaiming what had been taken from them. Not just a recipe, but a way of remembering, a way of belonging. The memory meal took hours to prepare. Each stage had to be precise. The bitterness was steeped slowly from dried, leaves banned in several regions. The spice blend included cracked seeds Mira had smuggled across the border, one hidden in the stitching of her coat. The sweetness came last, infused with dried fig, orange peel, honeycomb, and a drop of smoke from aged oak. Every step carried a piece of history that someone, somewhere, had tried to erase. And when it was ready, they didn't serve it from a stage. Lena took the first bowl and stepped down in the crowd, ladle still warm in her hand. She passed it to a wrinkled woman who had once taught underground baking classes to orphans. The woman passed it to a stonemason. He passed it to a seamstress. Around and around it went, each person taking a spoonful, then handing it along, like a memory shared rather than owned. Tomas watched from the edge. "It's working," he whispered. Mira nodded, but her eyes stayed sharp. "They'll come." And they did, but not with swords. From the edges of the crowd, officials arrived. Some wore council gray. Others were the insignia of the Royal Food Command. The commander who once stood against them was among them. But he didn't speak. He didn't move to stop them. He simply watched. And then Cadian appeared. He looked older, even more than before, but stronger now. His shoulders squared, his eyes clear. He joined Lena by the fire, then opened the second scroll they'd recovered from the kitchen below, a record of how flavor had been used as language for generations. He read aloud. No declarations, just a memory. A dish used to warn of coming drought. A broth that signaled safe passage during war. A meal served in silence to show mourning, and another served in the same way to show defiance. When he finished, there was no applause, just quiet understanding, and the knowledge that something had finally changed. The council officials didn't speak. They turned, walked away, and did not return. By nightfall, fires burned across the city, not to destroy, but to cook. Families who had once hidden their spices now shared them openly. Recipes that had lived in margins and memory were spoken aloud again. The registry proposal? It was quietly shelved. Never passed. No public announcement. Just gone. Carved's version of the Harmony plate was still served at state banquets. But fewer people showed up for those. They preferred their neighbor's soup, their grandmother's stew, their own stories. Weeks passed, then months. Lena opened a public kitchen, not one sponsored by nobles or recorded by scribes, but by the people. There was no fixed menu, no single dish. Every day brought something new or something old rediscovered. Tomas kept the books, but never once listed ingredients. Instead, he wrote down the faces of those who came. Mira ran flavor walks, underground cooking routes that passed through secret alleyways, cellars, rooftops, every stop sharing a different piece of the memory meal. Kadian became a teacher, not of history in the written sense, but of taste. He taught how to listen to flavor, how to feel what a meal was trying to say. People came from all over, not to be impressed, but to remember. Even the commander who once tried to stop them came back one day. Not in uniform, just in a thick coat, hands shaking slightly from a cold. He asked quietly for a bowl of the one with the bitterness. Mira gave it to him without a word. He didn't thank her, but he came back the next day, and the next. Eventually, he brought his daughter. One night, Lena sat outside the kitchen, the stars quiet above and the city glowing in soft warmth from every fire. Tomas leaned against the doorframe. Did we win? Lena didn't answer right away. She listened. A pot boiling 3 doors down. Laughter around a corner. Bread baking. Something spicy in the air. All of it different. All of it alive. I think we remembered, she said. Tomas smiled. That's more than most get. They sat in silence for a while. Then Mira came out with 3 bowls and handed one to each of them. Same old blend? Lena asked. Mira shook her head. Tried something different. Added a little vinegar this time. Lena sipped, then paused. It's sharp, but honest, Mira replied. Lena nodded. Good. It should be. And with that, they sat together under the stars, bowls warm in their hands, and the story of forgotten food fully remembered. Not because it had been preserved in perfect form, but because it had been allowed to change, to grow, to speak again. And that, in the end, was the most human flavor of all.